The harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. Why did he use that word?
God goes to extreme measures to bring the lost to himself.
The greatest gift you will ever give this world is your intimacy with God.
The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are all three inside of me. I've got the power right now.
I think what Jesus really wants is people to go. I want to be the answer to Jesus' prayer request.
Welcome to the Fuel for the Harvest podcast.
When this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, then shall the end come.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Fuel for the Harvest. This is Nathan.
And this is Charlie. We're your hosts for today. And we have a good friend joining us, Matt Luce. Thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so Matt is a really cool guy. He travels the world. He also is involved in youth ministry in the camp setting. He has an organization called Beehive Global and does coffee business as well. Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, what those things look like?
Sure. So a little bit of a chronic entrepreneur. And so have been in philanthropy and ministry for quite some time, most of my adult career, and ended up with a degree when I left school in classical languages of all things, which the more that I talk to younger people, like within the camp setting and that kind of thing, it's really, the university is only going to prepare you to learn how to learn and you're not really going to end up using a ton of what you major in necessarily. Well, at least that's my experience. So came out of school and was doing a couple of different things, got into fundraising for a private school in Knoxville relatively quickly after teaching for a couple of years. And so after that, God was really pressing on both my heart and my wife's. So we went back into vocational ministry in Buckley, Michigan with the Tabernacle up there. And up in northern Michigan, I was responsible for the outreach program. So kind of overseeing the food pantry, overseeing the missions program and that kind of stuff. And so then also doing some fundraising as well. And once we were there for a while, my wife Iris and I definitely, felt the calling to kind of take another step of faith out and start Beehive Global Collective, which is a ministry designed to basically, it's kind of like Fuel for the Harvest, like your guys' podcast. We started out 3 years ago with the idea that missionaries and missional people around the world sometimes need extra help keeping the fuel in the tank financially. And so, a lot of missionaries are able to raise their monthly support and what they need to stay on the mission field, and then are not always, ready for kind of what we would deem emergent needs. And so that was sort of the heart that kind of came out of this. Was this: I'd been around the world and had been working with different mission groups, and in Haiti and in southern Kenya primarily, and just kind of looking at, wow, a lot of incredible stuff is being done. How can we help you do more, basically? So that was sort of the foundational idea behind it, was just how do we help support people that are living out the gospel and the mission around the world. And from that, kind of this idea of crowdfunding. So fundraising, where we set out and we built a website at Beehive Global Collective to basically have a clearinghouse of different projects for different missions. And so we wanted to be able to connect donors with specific causes that would really resonate with them, but also be a place where, whether you're OMS, WGM, Quaker, whatever.
Is that oatmeal or?
Yeah. Well, the Friends group, basically, within the realm of looking for financially sustainable mission projects and a form or key point of discipleship happening within a specific mission project. That was kind of the realm that we wanted to focus into. So not getting into long-term support type things. Nothing like, I mean, they're great organizations that already do that. Compassion International being an incredible example of that. But that's not what we felt like our call was, because that was already being done. So, you know, we were really looking at kind of a narrow niche at one level, as far as like, well, I don't know if anyone's really doing this. And that was kind of one of the hardest things starting out, was how do you define something that you're doing that's a new ministry that it feels like no one's ever really kind of taken a crack at before. And so we wanted to be broad enough in the sense of we want to help any missionaries that come to us that kind of meet those criteria. We did things differently. We do things differently in the sense that, you know, we want to inspire donors to engage. And so we invest in good photography. And before we sign on to any of these mission organizations, you know, we send a team to be there in person and get to know. I mean, it's the whole idea of, you've got to break bread with people to really get to know who they are, what they're doing, see it for yourself, be boots on the ground. That's kind of one of the things that we say a lot, is just how do we become boots on the ground to see these different organizations or specific missions.
Wow. What an amazing vision and way to like bring together the body of Christ. I love the interdenominational nature of your ministry, that it's not about such and such denomination or such and such missions agency, but it's about, hey, the kingdom needs to come and we need to accomplish the mission that Jesus has set us out to do, and let's do that. If we've got this, we're united under the banner of Christ. So that's awesome.
Right. It's kind of like what we were talking about before we went on air too, of like, you know, whatever the denomination is, that's your favorite flavor of ice cream, really, great. But we're all working together for the same end goal, right? And that's to see people won for the kingdom through the gospel. And so, and I've been able to, and blessed to be able to see a lot of different mission organizations through that. And, you know, I wouldn't say that anyone gets it 100% right, as much as I wouldn't say that we get it 100% right all the time. But I would say that within that, usually you're getting about 90% spot on, you know, and when you're looking for, you know, replicable things and financially sustainable projects. And what we mean by that is, like, if we're going to set up fundraising for a project or a specific thing, specific mission item, you know, we want there to be an aspect of it that will help the missionaries become more financially sustainable long term. So right now we're working with some missionaries in northern Thailand through One Mission Society, OMS, and we're raising some money for them to get a dairy goat project implemented. And
how cool is that?
Their big focus is agroeducation. And so they've got a farm called Ripple Valley Farm. And their whole idea is, if they can help train the local tribesmen in northern Thailand, then they're really kind of taking a crack at child exploitation. And so it's sort of that follow things all the way to the, you know, continue going upstream as much as you can until you get to the problem, and then try to address it right at the root. And so if they're able to help those local tribesmen become more financially sustainable, it kind of interrupts the supply chain downstream, if you get what I mean. And at the same time, it also provides their mission a way to be financially sustainable as well, by, you know, taking the cheese and, you know, all of those different goat products to market as well. So it's a win-win.
Wow.
And that's the kind of thing that we look for.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What another great idea of like, it's such a, I don't know, it's such a human thing to try to address the symptoms of a problem instead of the core issue.
Mhm.
How great is it
Right.
that they're addressing the core issue?
Right.
Yeah,
Total.
hugely important. And I think that concept of sustainability financially and with projects and missions is highly, highly important. We see that time and time again where people can die out and things dry up, and then it's like, now what? Or
Mhm.
like you're saying, those emergency moments of, hey, we have this project that came up to help this initiative move forward to get the gospel into a new area, or
Mhm.
some crisis happened. Now what do we do? And for
Right.
you guys to be able to step in that, I think is meeting a massive need and a massive gap in the missions world. Some things you
Well,
said. Go
yeah,
ahead.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, go for it first, and then I'll
Yeah,
hop
well,
in.
I mean, the only thing I was going to chime in with that is, like you guys have seen as well in your work around the world that, there are times that things come up that you can't wait for another budget cycle. Like you got to just say, all right, this is, all right, God, we see the doors are opening now. We don't know how long they're going to be open. And so, give us the strength to strike while the iron's
Yeah.
hot, kind of,
Mhm.
And I'll say one more thing, Charlie, and then shut up so you can talk too. Sorry. I mean, but I think that the season that we're in now more than ever makes that even more mission critical. To be able to have, I mean, we don't know what tomorrow looks like as far as what borders stay open or closed with COVID and everything else that's going on. And so there's a real reality that within all of that, things, mission groups could be expelled from different countries, and who knows. So if we can kind of try to stay at the ready, let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Not only is the landscape always changing and shifting right now, it seems like really rapidly because of things like COVID and border closures. And even I was just researching one particular nation we're trying to get to sometime in the near future, and they have closures from city to city. So
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, so they don't allow anybody to travel in or out of this particular city. I'm like, well, how are you supposed to fly there? Like, so you're
Right.
telling me we're gonna fly in and be locked in that city? Come on, man. So there's those kinds of restrictions, and then not to mention the ever-changing landscape of security issues as well,
Mhm.
and people
Mhm.
getting kicked out or restricted in certain ways, and that urgency can really matter in certain moments. That's huge. You mentioned a few things that I think would be really fascinating for us to hear about, of
Sure.
stepping out in faith, and like, hey, God was leading us to walk into ministry and then to start this initiative, the Beehive Global Collective. Nobody's doing this. That's got to have some level of, man, this is kind of nerve-wracking. Like, here we go, God, let's see what happens.
Right.
You mentioned, hey, God was really leading us. Why don't you share a little bit more? How did God speak to you guys or lead you to do that? And what was that like first stepping out? Maybe there's somebody listening who's saying, hey,
Mm.
God's leading me to do something,
Right.
but I'm not sure if it's really him, or what do I like? How am I going to step out if I don't know that this is going to work?
Sure. But there have been a couple of times in my life that I've heard what you would only be able to call the clear audible voice of God. And one of those times was very, very clear in the calling to go back into vocational ministry, to start work at the church in Northern Michigan. And I think that was sort of the beginning steps of a process of like, here we go back into a life of ministry entirely. And ultimately to where we are now, which I would deem us, as my wife and I, as itinerant missionaries. We're based in the States, and she is loving and supportive and homeschools our child, and gives me the ability to travel abroad, to vet these places, to meet with new mission organizations, and then ultimately also to kind of come behind as well, and check up on and encourage and support, from time to time. Hey, what are the needs? Are they the same? That kind of thing. And so when we decided to step away from church ministry into starting something new, it was kind of more of that, like, there was sort of a yin that it was time for us to move to the next thing, and we knew that God was calling us into that. We knew when we got married that we were ultimately called into international missions. It was just, when is the time gonna all line up? At that same camp that we were talking about, Charlie, at Indian Springs, when I was 13, I felt that calling specifically to international missions, and there have been several things throughout the years that have confirmed that. So it was really more of a season of like, okay, you've been trained, you've been in vocational ministry in a church setting, and you've learned a little bit more of like what it means to live on a support base salary, that kind of stuff, kind of the practical and tactical. Now here's what we're really looking at. I think the only other thing that kind of resonates into that was just kind of knowing that or knowing when there are God ideas, knowing that not all God ideas have to happen all the time, or right when you think of them, right? So an example of that is, you mentioned kind of the coffee selling, which is sort of the other hat. So we own a coffee company called Cisterna Coffee Company. We're just getting started. It's
Good
kind
coffee,
of a
by the way.
Yeah,
I highly enjoy it and recommend.
Yeah. It's a dovetail. Thank you for that. It's a dovetail into what Beehive does, where the mission and vision long term for Cisterna is basically coffee for mission, coffee with a mission, where we are committed to direct trade with independent producers globally. We want to be able to support them the best that we can in all aspects, giving them fair above market price, and also connecting them with local resources. So right now we're sourcing coffee from northern Thailand, and not necessarily from Christian producers, but with the ability to build relationships so that one day if something happens, the wheels come off the wagon for these guys, we have missionaries close at hand that we can point them to and say, hey, you can go get help here. It's that kind of idea. Some of our producers down in Bolivia, we're trying to open up channels there to get Bolivian coffee in as well. That's kind of the focus. And then the back end of that is that the profits from that flow back into ministry initiatives through Beehive. So we knew we needed to have a way to generate more of an income stream, and we knew we needed to keep them independent for the sake of running one as a business and running one as a ministry. And so that's kind of the twofold of what I do right now, is managing both, and fortunately traveling for both, and building relationships with missionaries that also have coffee connections, or hey, we're going to be in country somewhere with Beehive. We'll be able to also, look, next February, I'll be in Kenya, in northern Kenya, visiting a church startup that we're working on, in a community project. And, we're going to go through the coffee producing region in central Kenya as well, just to try to ferret out some producers and, try to build relationships. Point of all of that story was, like I said, not all God ideas have to happen right at the right moment. I was on a plane leading a team back from Haiti, and was writing in my journal. And after we founded Cisterna Coffee Company, I went back and I found it and sent some screenshots to the guys that were working with me to get the coffee company off the ground. And it was like 3-4 years prior to this that I had been writing down in this journal, looking at all of the coffee producing countries around the world are in some way, shape, or form in conflict, or have come through conflict, or are areas where we're also focused in ministry. And I was thinking about Haitian coffee at the time, and man, I would so love for the country of Haiti to kind of right the ship, and to be able to build relationships with coffee producers there, because the coffee bean is incredible. Just the land and the terroir and the flavor of the coffee. It's burnt sugar, kind of toasted marshmallow notes. And so I'm like journaling all of this out, and this idea coming of like, it's sort of like Endless Summer, right? Using coffee to fund ministry initiatives globally. And so it stays in the journal. We put it down, and a couple of years later, we start to feel like, okay, it's time to move on to the next thing. It's time to get back international. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like Beehive Global Collective. It looks like building basically a GoFundMe crowdfunding type platform for Christian ministry. And so that's what we've been working on. And then it was a year and a half later that we were in Thailand, and we were visiting some missionaries, and they had tried this kind of idea before, but hey, if you're full-time on the field missionary, like that's your focus, like that's day in and day out. And so just sort of like, the vapors of an idea start coming back together. And then all of a sudden it's like, I think I've thought about this before. Let me, there it is. And so, you start to see how God's weaving all of these filament strands into some kind of tapestry that you can't see because you're so close. And then you kind of take a step back for a second and you go, wow, all right, that's what it really is. So we're kind of, go ahead. Yeah.
One thing that I love about everything that you're sharing is how it reveals it reveals exactly what you're talking about, that not every dream that God gives you comes to light immediately. So it obviously reveals that. But I also love that it reveals the diversity in the body of Christ, and how you have this like business sense, and this, you called yourself a serial entrepreneur, like this
chronic. He said chronic.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Like a cough. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Cereal is the kinder version of that, but yeah, for sure.
And I just love that God has utilized you in your uniqueness to advance the mission, because honestly, we have this, I don't know, I think a lot of people have this weird idea of what missions is, and we have this kind of epic picture of it in our minds, but really missions is just a collection of little tiny moments where you built a relationship with somebody and you have an opportunity to speak into their life and reveal Jesus to them. And
absolutely,
like, you're using your entrepreneurial spirit and your business acumen to accomplish just that. And all these people are going to know Jesus. I'm dreaming about what the impact of your ministry 5 years, 10 years, 15, 50 years, 100 years from now, if the Lord decides to wait that long, all of that, just because you decided to step more fully into who God's made you to be, and use those skills and gifts and talents. Just like the people who are listening, they might have this kind of view of themselves like, well, I'm not built to stand on a stage and preach, so I can't be a missionary and I can't be in ministry. And it's like, no.
Right. Right.
God is so much bigger than that.
And I even think about the coffee beans. So that helps people on ground who are working the fields with the beans, getting them produced. That helps the missionaries who that's providing funding for through Beehive, however that works out. And not only that, but I imagine once those beans are sold, with a ministry like us, I hope we can sell some for you guys and spread the word. And then I'll call you when we have a missions project going on. So say, perfect. Hey, we got our guys out in the field. But then I imagine those who are laboring for God's kingdom in ordinary places, they may say, hey, I'm going to pull out a cup of coffee with you and impact your life. So lives are going to be impacted while they're drinking this coffee, having a good time together, providing high quality coffee for their neighbors or their friends, and having conversations for their lives to go deeper with Jesus. It's like impact, triple fold, all around impact that could be happening with this, which is really exciting. Something else I want to go back to, rewind a little bit. You mentioned you felt called, I think you said when you were 13 at Indian Springs Camp. So how did you feel called? Like, was somebody preaching and you're like, oh man, they're talking about missions. I need to go forward to their altar call and give my life for this, or what? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, basically, that's how it happened, in a short nutshell. Um, but I mean, and you and I know each other from being at camp and sharing time together the last couple of years. But I mean, kind of that rogue personality of like, there's not a lot of round pegs that I fit into. You
Yeah.
know, the whole chronic entrepreneur. I'm going to take a crack at something a little crazy anyway, and so you know, like you were saying, Nathan, that people have this misconception of missions being, well, I'm either going to have to go to deepest, darkest Africa and hand out tracts, or I have to be on a stage and I have to preach, and I don't want to do either of those things, or you know, I can't learn a language, or you know, whatever. What all of the reasons that we tell ourselves that we can't do something.
Mm.
And since we're talking about missions, all the reasons why people tell themselves they couldn't do missions, when ultimately that's who we're called to be every day. You know, what I love, you know, I mean, I have the best job in the world. I get to travel 3-4 times a year overseas to encourage missionaries around the world, hopefully help them, you know, raise the financial funds they need. Sometimes I get to speak, sometimes I don't. But then I get to come home and work from home, be with my family. And, you know, like my 5-year-old daughter is a missionary in our neighborhood, you know, and she may not realize it 100%, but she's building relationships and she's witnessing and she's talking to our neighbors and, you know, and is fearless. And she'll say, you know, this is who I am and I'm a Christian. What about you? And it's like, all right, that's awesome. You know, I get to see that. And I get to see that every day play out. But to answer your question, Charlie, it really was sort of that, like, I mean, it was a missionary night service. I can't remember who was preaching. It wasn't like, you know, that audible Shekinah glory voice coming down, but it was that like stirring within the spirit of, this resonates with me. And it was kind of this willingness of whatever, like, I just want to be overseas, hands and feet. I knew that was the calling because I knew that not everybody is called that way. And that's okay. You know, I mean, we need home front missionaries. My grandfather would say often that he always wanted to be called to be a missionary, and he wasn't, and he struggled with that for a while, and then he realized that his calling was to be King David, and so he took that mantle, and he knew that was his missional calling. And so he did everything in the world that he could to philanthropically support mission groups around the world. So I grew up seeing that. I grew up with that kind of example. And for him, it was, my calling is to stay and build the treasure so that, you know, others, me now, could go out and be kind of the missional hands and feet. So it was really, at 13, the beginnings of that was the kind of the stirring of the spirit, you know, that kind of churning of like, okay, if it's deepest, darkest Africa, handing out tracts, I could be cool with that. You know, if it's, you know, something else, I could be cool with that. I'm going to be willing to go, and try to utilize the gift that I've been given. And so then, you know, we talk about those kind of filament strands of life that you don't really realize everything that's coming together until you step back and you look at the tapestry for a minute. And I mean, one of the things for me is that I am able to assimilate language fairly quickly. And I'm not going to say that I'm fluent or I'm great. I can be conversational within a week and a half of an immersion scenario or whatever.
Wow.
And part of that comes from, you know, the Greek and the Latin and the classical language training that even then I was doing just because I enjoyed it, you know. But like I said, you don't end up using your degree, but you end up using the skills that you learn from that. And so yeah, couple of weeks in Vietnam and I can be conversational, or when I lived in Kenya, I lived in southern Kenya for a year on a mission project, and Maasai is probably the most fluent language that I hold. And you know, I shouldn't, right? So
yeah, for all our Maasai guys who are listening out there right now.
right. Yeah, let's just drop that for a second. And I was shocked when I had been away for 17 years, and then when it was able to go back to that mission project, and it was just like I hadn't missed a day, which was really cool to see. So, you know, that's part of it, is like that's a skill set. That's something that God's given me, and again, I'm going to try to just use it for His glory as best I can. So, I mean, I think that's what it really comes down to. I mean, I think for anyone that's listening, you know, there's no special formula to any of this. There's just the willingness to be used to advance the kingdom wherever you are, right? That's what we're called to do, whether that's the next door neighbor and you're a 5-year-old little girl, or, you know, it's what you and I and Charlie get to do, Nathan, would be in places all around the world and share the gospel and that kind of thing. So,
Absolutely.
and it's everything in between.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I know that one of the messages that most impacted my heart was when I was first discerning if I was supposed to go into missions or ministry or whatever, was not that God uses the people who have the most expertise or the most outgoing people or the most, you know, highly skilled people, but really He's looking for humble-hearted people, you know, people who are willing to be humble, people who are passionately seeking after Him, people who are willing to take on His vision for their life, and ultimately people who are willing to take that step forward in faith and looking at the path ahead of them, not knowing if there's going to be something underneath their foot to catch them, but still being caught by the Lord and being willing to take that step. And so it's it's the King Davids, the lowly shepherd boys, that it's like Jesse didn't even call David out from the field when, you know, Samuel showed up. It's probably not David, you know. that's not the future king of Israel.
It can't be that guy.
Right, exactly. Right. But here God's using anybody and everybody, and I love the people He chooses to use because it reveals His glory, right? Ultimately, it's proof that He is God and we are not, and anything good that comes from these ministries, it's like, yeah, that's a miracle of the Lord.
Yeah, that's for those of you listening, you don't know, but I named this call the Three Stooges. So you're sitting on this podcast with the Three Stooges, and somehow by the grace of God, His kingdom is advancing through our lives. So
yeah, and when we get out of the way and don't take it upon ourselves, right? Like it's not a mantle for us to carry. It's like you were saying, Nathan, like all those things that God prepares us for. A story that's really resonated with me this summer that I keep going back to is, you know, and it's perfect when you're talking about stepping out in faith. You know, the way that Noah trusted God and stepped out in faith with his family the way that he did. But I think one of the things that really resonates with me in that whole story is this idea that after God had called all of the pairs of animals together, He goes back out and He says, all right, Noah, now get these extra pairs of clean and unclean animals, and you're going to take them with you, and you're going to take care of them for almost the whole year. And God was providing for that. And Noah, you know, all the other animals are there, right? The pairs of every creepy crawly creature that now populates the earth. And so when it's all said and done and they disembark on dry land again, you know, the first thing Noah is going to do is give thanks. And he's got all of the animals that are there for sacrifice to offer that pleasing aroma to God. And that's the line that I think we miss, is like, you know, God sees the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice, but also of the orientation of his heart, and vows never to destroy the world like that again. Now, what I take from that is God's preparing He's providing what we need, even when we don't see it, we don't understand it. Even if we're living with it, we're living with skills that, we may not understand why we have them until the moment is right. And so I think that's kind of a big part of it, and an encouragement, hopefully, for anybody listening, is that, like, look, within the stock of who you are, we're all an amalgam of our parts and our experiences, right? Like the things that we've lived through. And all of those things can be used for God's glory, whether, they were hard or painful along the way or not. There's redemptive glory in the things that were hard. They're parts of my story that, I'm not proud of, that God brought me through. So there's grace and there's redemption, but then there's also an equipping in ways that we don't ever fathom until the right time. And then it's, oh, wow, okay, beautiful. I'm ready. Let's do it,
Yeah, absolutely. So. Amen. Hallelujah.
Matt, why don't you tell us one story of something you've seen out in the field, maybe something wild and crazy, or something where God broke through in a powerful way. What's something that you've witnessed that might be an interesting story for everyone to hear?
Gosh, okay. There's several. But I think the one that really comes to mind for kind of tick all of the boxes that you mentioned, wild and crazy, and really cool God breakthrough. So when I had gone back to Kenya, it was the first time in 17 years that we had gone, and we first spent several days in the South and at Older Gacy Development Project, and then went back to Nairobi, and then it was a whole nother day's travel up into the north. And so we were working with a community church with the African Gospel Church in a tiny village called the Rendile. Well, they're the Rendile people, but it's a village called Nairobi. And so we were there kind of assessing the situation. We could do, almost a whole podcast on that whole story. It's incredible how God's brought all of that together.
Maybe we'll have to have you on and get the whole story on that sometime.
Yeah. I would love that. Just the vignettes are that the pastor of that church now was a shepherd boy from the South. He knew me years ago, and then he answered his own missionary call, and so he's Maasai, and he's witnessing to and building a church for the Rendile in northern Kenya, 2 days travel from his family, because there's a language commonality, between Maasai and Turkana and Rendile. They all kind of share that same Ma root language. So I can scrape my way by when I go to Nairobi, but they speak it so much faster than the Southern Maasai. It's hard to keep up. Anyway, while we're there, so to get to the story, my brother-in-law was our photographer at the time, and so he traveled with me on several of our early initiatives, which that was always kind of an interesting kind of side note thing too, of like trying to convince people to fund mission initiatives to go find out ways to fund others was kind of an interesting sell, and it's like, you got to really nail your elevator speech on that to get the funding to get abroad in the first place. So we're abroad, and basically Ace, my brother-in-law, got cursed by a medicine man, and we had negotiated with this woman at a well to take her picture, and we had been trying to convince and tell some of these Rendile and Samburu women, hey, if you let us help, if you let us take your picture, we're gonna be able to tell the story. We're coming back. Our first initiative before we started with this church plant was clean water and just trying to raise money to put wells in. And we do work with a Dutch organization called Well Wishes. So we were there kind of visiting some of their well remediation projects at the time. Yeah, again, COVID has made things really difficult. The Netherlands is pretty much shut down right now. So the work doesn't go on like it was. So we focus more on the church plant at this point. So while we were there, we're talking to this lady. She changed her mind and she started asking for more shillings, which would seem like, okay, no big deal. but everybody there is used to kind of that running that racket on the Mazungus. The Tour d'Afrique goes right through Las Amas, which is the bicycle race, I think, from Cairo all the way down to Joburg. And so I can't imagine doing that on a bicycle.
It would have to be the right time of the year.
Oh my goodness. So,
I think I'll take a motorcycle and do it.
Right. I'll be the support crew. So they're used to this kind of the shakedown, and so because they can get 5 times what we had negotiated for a photo. And so we took some pictures, and then she started getting belligerent and demanding more. And I knew what was going on. I could understand what she was saying. My best friend is from the north. He's a Rendile, but he was a Fundi that worked down in the south when I was there before. So we've known each other for 20 years at this point. And so I'm looking at Myson, and he's like, "Yep, time to go." So we were in a little Toyota sedan. We don't have them in the States, but it's one of those great little cars that you run across and you're like, this is really kind of cool. I wish we had them in America, but we don't. I remember the plate number, but I don't remember the name of the car, of all things. But the fact that we drove this like 4-door sedan into the middle of the desert, it was like, I love that aspect of the whole story. Anyway, she's yelling at us and she's making hand gestures, and which I'll omit in the story, but basically we're heading back to our camp, and Ace is starting to like go pale in the back of the car, and he's like, "Dude, I don't feel well," and I used all this stuff, and I'm like, it's probably just the desert. Like, you're not used to. I mean, it's high altitude and desert. It's a wonky climate in northern Kenya, sub-Saharan, but still, like I said, altitude. Like, you're probably dehydrated. So we get home. It's an hour and a half drive to the camp. We get back, and he's still like flailing. And so I'm like, okay, this is getting a little more serious. And so like I'm on a timer. Like I've got my phone going off every 15 minutes, and it's like ginger ale, water, ginger ale, water, like just on road, trying to get something in, settle his stomach. Then he starts throwing up everything that we're getting down. I mean, it's like, okay, like this is getting really gnarly. And this goes on all afternoon. And I'm thinking, we've all eaten the same things. You go through all the normal stuff, like that you think through. Anyway, end of the night, I'm like turning the gears in my head, and I look at my buddy Myson, and I'm like, "Myson, tell me again exactly what she said." And he was kind of, he didn't want to insult us at first, so he wasn't really saying what was really. And I'm like, "Tell me exactly what she said." And so he started recounting everything, and he made the same hand gesture towards me that this lady had made. Instantly, my boots filled with sweat. It was like cold sweat drenched my whole body. And it was like the curse had been transferred. And it hit me in about 30 seconds. And I'm like, okay, I don't have long before I start going down the tubes too. So I was standing up at the back of our camp area. I made it around to the front and sat down, and I looked straight into Anthony's face, Ace, and I said, "She cursed us." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, straight up, she went, and it, had a Rendile medicine man curse us because we didn't pay what she wanted. So we grab hands. I've got like a little Bluetooth speaker, and always have, like, I learned the hard way from being in India that one of the best ways to dispel the darkness is just praise and worship music. So I've got kind of a like spiritual warfare playlist. And so fumbling hands, getting that out, and basically just had enough time to get music playing in the background, and grabbed Anthony's hands, and we just started praying hard back and forth. And about 15 minutes of like just taking turns, lifting each other up. I got this vision of a matador fighting a bull. And so I just started naming the lances that are in the bull. and like basically like praying them to be pulled out one by one. And it was the most incredible thing. Like, as I'm praying that, Anthony was saying that like he could hear or feel like electrical current kind of running up each of his fingers as I named them audibly. And as soon as that was done, it was like curse was broken. And like we look at each other, like tears shining in our eyes, and just start like, we just broke into laughter. We were just laughing our heads off. Meanwhile, Myson's in the corner and he's looking at us like, what just happened? You know, like he was a little more skeptical, and we're trying to like, nope, this is actually a normal, like this is okay, like no reason to be scared. He kept his distance from us for about a day and a half after that anyway, just kind of like, what's going to happen next? But yeah, so wild and crazy and kind of big God breakthrough moment all at the same time. Like to see like a true medicine man curse broken in real time. And you know, like after that, we like, it was late at night, we're laughing and turned the music up, and then collected 12 stones at the front of our camp and like built an Ebenezer. So, and I mean, like, that's one of the pictures that I'll love forever of like, hey, you know, that was a true Ebenezer for, you know, on this place, God did something amazing. And, so yeah, that kind of stuff, you know, that happens a lot.
It's when 1 Peter 5:8 and other scriptures say things like Satan prowls around like a roaring lion seeking whom he will devour, or Ephesians 6, put on the armor of God that you may be able to withstand the schemes of the devil. All these types of scriptures, or Revelation 12. Satan, that angel, was thrown down to earth, that ancient serpent, to wage war against the saints, those who hold to the commandments of Jesus. And so this is not some ancient flowery language to describe unknown scientific realities that we know better. Like this is a reality. This is a spiritual realm. There's a battle going on. And when we start to advance the kingdom, we better expect resistance. Like Paul said the same thing. Hey, I tried to come to you. I, Paul, again and again, I wanted to come to you, the Thessalonians he's speaking to, but Satan hindered us. Like, whoa, hey, if Satan attacked Jesus and tempted him, and Satan attacked Paul and hindered him, then, well, we better be expecting the same thing. And yet, at the same time, the power of Jesus is far greater. Greater is he who's in us than he's who in the world.
Right.
And how exciting to see, like, you lived that reality. You have lived that reality. We all are living that reality, that Satan is firing arrows at us. All we do is lift up the shield of faith. In reality, we praise Jesus and trust in him, and that darkness is expelled. And man, how incredible.
Oh yeah. Awareness is not something that should lead us to fear, but to confidence in who God is.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, Charlie, too, it reminded me, like, 13-year-old Matt, like, those were the stories that inspired me, you know. Like, I remember vividly hearing missionaries talking at one point of, like, you know, like hearing the voodoo drums in probably like in Haiti, like in the, you know, the valleys, and knowing that the war party was coming. And so like all of these, you know, the missionaries seeing guys stop at the edge of the compound and not coming in. And so then the next day they were like, hey, you know, why didn't you raid? They were they'd made their peace. They were prepared for whatever happened next. And, you know, and then these like locals saying, we couldn't get through. You know, there were these like guys that were clothed in light, you know, like we know angels watching the perimeters that, you know, made themselves visible to an advancing war party, and the missionaries couldn't see that, and that kind of stuff. Like 13-year-old me loved those stories, believed that. I never thought that I would live it out, and now, you know, I am. And it's even, you know, it's more radical and real than you could ever imagine. But like you said too, Nathan, like none of that should drive us to any sort of fear. But just to the knowledge of the reality of like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like, even was it Philippians 6? Our power, our battle's not in flesh and blood.
Yeah,
And
Ephesians 6. Yeah.
Ephesians 6, not Philippians. Thank you. But so yeah.
Yeah, I think it does.
It's just
It
reality.
doesn't drive us to fear, but to more faith. Like,
Yeah.
wow, look at this reality. God's already spoken of this,
Mm-hmm.
and He's
Mhm.
far greater. Jesus is way more powerful.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, that's an exciting note to end on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, what if someone wants to get in touch with Beehive Global Collective or Cisterna Coffee Company? What can they do?
So the way to start out would be, I mean, you can check us out on Facebook. Beehive Global Collective and Cisterna Coffee Company are both on Facebook. Check us out and follow us so that you can get updates. We have not launched fully the store for Cisterna. We're hammering out a few more details before we kind of take everything public as far as opening the store and running full time for the coffee. And then check out beehiveglobalcollective.org, and you can reach out that way, drop us a line, get an email, join the mailing list, find out a little bit about some of the other things that we're doing, the things that you heard us talking about today. And we also have a podcast called The Slow Drip, and we've got a season that's out, and we talk coffee and Christian culture. We're working on the season 2 right now. So maybe the next time we do this, it's all of us talking coffee and missions on The Slow Drip. But you can find that wherever you find podcasts as well.
Awesome.
And that's another good way to kind of keep up with what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, Matt, it's been an honor having you on the call. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's listening. One reminder real quick, to subscribe and unsubscribe, or unsubscribe then resubscribe.
Don't stay unsubscribed.
Yeah, don't stay unsubscribed.
Right.
That just helps us to move up in the rankings so that more people can hear what God's up to. So thank you so much for doing that, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day. God bless.